Maseches Nedarim Daf Chavav. We begin at the end of Daf Chafei, where the Gemara had introduced the Machlokes, and the Gemara is going to try to bring a couple of proofs to either of the two sides of that Machlokes. The Machlokes is in the topic of the sugya of Neder she Batla Miktsasa Batla Kula or not. So let's introduce the topic, the Machlokes, and then the Gemara's proofs. So the concept of Neder she Batla Miktsasa is if somebody makes a neder, and part of it is invalid. It included something which has to be canceled or it's automatically void. The question is, does that mean that the entire neder is void, or is only that part void, but the rest of it is fine? Now, the Mishnah and a brisa which is quoted, the Mishnah we had, and a Mishnah later on Daf Samach Vav, quote a machlokes on the topic between Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, and Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. Now, Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva hold Neder Shabbat Miksasa Batla Kula. If part of it isn't chal, the entire thing is void. The Chachamim and Beis Shammai hold no, only the part which is void, the rest of it is fine. What's a classic case? So, the case would be if somebody sees a group of people eating his figs, and he says he doesn't know who's in the group, and he says, "My figs are also to all of you. They're answering you to have any hana from any of my figs." Then he finds out that his father was one of the people. And his father, of course, he never wanted to aser. So the neder is batal in regards to his father because that is a nidrei shogegin. It's by accident. He was not aware that his father was included in the group. So the fact that his father was included and that part of the neder is batal, does that mean the entire neder is batal? The entire neder is void and it's not chal at all and everybody has allowed to have hana? That would be the opinion of Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva. Or do we say only the part which is batal, the rest of it is fine? That would be the opinion of Beis Shammai and the Chachamim. Now, the Gemara's question is, what exactly is the case? And the Gemara is going to have two types of cases as to what he said when he expressed that I did not mean for this to apply to my father. There's two ways of saying that. One is that he says, I never would have phrased it the way I did in the first place. The other is that he says, I'm cool with my phrasing. I just didn't mean for it to be including my father. I would have added something to the expression. So let's say the first thing he says was, all of you, he's referring to the whole group. He says, all of you are usher to get any hana from my figs. Now, when he finds that his father's in the group, he says, I would have said, if I know my father there, I would have said, all of you are forbidden to have hana, except for my father. There, he's keeping his original phrase. He's not changing. The fact that he said all of you, he's sticking with all of you. He just said, I would have added a line. I would have added that there's an exception. So in a case like that, it's more likely that the neder is still chal and only his father is accepted than the second type of case. The second type of case is where he says, I never would have phrased it that way because it's disrespectful to my father. I would, instead of saying all of you are usher except my father, I don't want it to sound even for a second like my father does, so I would have said, you're usher and you're usher and you're usher and you're usher, and it would have left my father out. There, he's totally revamping what he said, and he's saying what I said is a mistake. I never would have said something like that. A case like that, he's really taking down the entire neder and he's making a new one. In a case like that, it's much more likely to say that the entire neder is batal because he's really regretting the entire thing. There's a regret on the whole thing. So in the first case where he's not changing his language, he's just adding. So there, it's more likely and more logical to say that the neder is chal. And the truth is the neder didn't change. What he had in mind all along. He just wasn't aware his father was there, so he didn't spell it out. Now he's clarifying what he said. In the case, however, where he is changing his language, he's taking the neder apart, it's much more likely that the entire thing is batal. Now we have machlokes Rab and Rava where the machlokes is and where everybody agrees, and of course the machlokes will be what they agree to. So according to Rabba, the machlokes is only in the situation where he's changing the language. There is a machlokes if he's taking the whole thing down and therefore it's batal completely, or we say the part that he took down and the rest of it he's okay with. However, if he's not changing the language, everybody will agree that the neder is still chal on the other people besides the father. That's Rabba's opinion. Rava disagrees. Rava says no. The machlokes is only in a case where he's keeping his original language. There you have a machlokes. However, in the case where he's changing his language, everybody will agree that it's not chal at all. The entire neder is gone. Now, according to Rabba, that the machlokes is in the case where he's changing the original language, the topic of the machlokes, the difference between the two, is where somebody's changing the language, does he mean to take the entire neder down and the entire thing is batal, he regrets the entire thing, or no, he only regrets the way he phrased it, he regrets that he didn't phrase it differently, but he still means for it to exist. According to Rava, it's slightly more complicated. Rava holds, no, in that case, everybody agrees that he's changing the entire neder. The machlokas is in a case where he's using the same language. So what's the machlokas over there? So Rava says the machlokas is tfos lashon rishon or tfos lashon achar, and that's a Gemara in Maseches Torah, where somebody makes multiple different karbanos on one animal. There's a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Do we assume that the first thing he said is what sticks and everything else is void? Or do we say that it all is chal together and it's many different types of karbanos on this animal and you have to figure out a way to deal with it? So the halacha, therefore, the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai here would be as follows. According to one opinion, we say that the first thing that he said is what counts. And therefore, when he says, I would have said everything, all of you are usher except my father, so the main thing is that all of you are usher, and he really didn't change a thing. Everything's the same. So we say tfos lashon rishon, and therefore it stays. There's no taking anything apart, and the neder is fine. That would be the opinion of Beis Shammai, and therefore the neder stays. It's not about the law. According to Beis Hillel, we say that the entire thing has to be taken into account, and therefore he's now changing what he said before, and you would have to say that the entire neder is batal because he changed it. Now, according to this, then machlokes is actually something slightly different. The machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is not over neder shebatal miksasa batal kul or not. The machlokes is over tfos lashon rishon and tfos lashon achron, but everybody agrees that a neder shebatal miksasa batal kul. The only question is this a neder shebatal miksasa, or is he really sticking with the same neder as before because we're tfos lashon rishon? The Gemara now brings a few rayas, and it's from the continuation of this Mishnah that we've been quoting on Daf Samach Vav. We're going to bring one raya from the next part of the Mishnah, and then another raya from the latter part of the Mishnah. So the first raya is as follows. The Mishnah continues, and it says, what is an example of Rabbi Akiva's opinion that the neder that is batal miksasa is batal kula? And it brings three cases, case A, B, and C. Or let's call it case 1, 2, and 3. In case 1 and 2, the halacha is that the neder is batal miksasa is batal kula. In case 3, it's not batal. Only part of it is batal, but the rest of it is okay. And this is all going to go in Rabbi Akiva's opinion, the Mishnah says. We're going to have to figure out why the halacha is true, why there's a difference between case 1 and 2 versus case 3, and how it's only according to Rabbi Akiva. So now, what are the three cases? So the cases where somebody says, I'm answering hana myself from a group of people. Then he finds out that his father, this is an example, not spelled out, but then he finds out part of it is not true, is he regrets, because let's say his father was one of those people. So the three cases are as follows. In the first case, he says, I'm not going to have hana from any of you. There the halacha is, if his father is one of them, the entire neder is batal. Second case, he says, I'm not going to have enough from you, and 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 he goes through the entire thing, and his father turns out to be one of them, and his father turns out to be the first one that he said. The Gemara ignores this point in the beginning. We'll get back to it later. The father is the first one that he said. There again, the halacha is that the entire neder and all of them is batal. And it sounds like Eidah Shabbat Miksasa Batla Kula. Those are the first two cases. In both of those, the entire neder is batal. Now the third case is where again he says, I'm not going to have any hana from you and you and you. He goes through each of them individually, but this time his father was the last one. So the halacha is the neder is chal on everybody else except for his father, and he only takes his father out when he finds out that that's who his father was. So now the Gemara has to figure out, like we said, why does this have to be Rabbi Akiva? How is this an example of Eidah Shabbat Miksasa Batla Kula? And what's the difference between the cases? So the Gemara first says, according to Rabbah, it's very good. Why? Because according to Rabbah, in a case where he's stuck with the same language that he said before, there is no machlokes, and everybody agrees that the Isser is chal. So that would be the third case is Eidah Shabbat Miksasa is fine as loy batal kula. The Isser is chal, and neder is chal. He's keeping his original neder, and now we understand why that's halacha there. In the first two cases, though, it's where he changed. And the reason why we have two cases, because in the first one he said all of you, and then later he changed to one by one. He said, if I would have known my father was there, I would have said each of you individually and left him out. And the second case was the opposite. He first said each of you individually, and then he said I would have changed to all of you. Each of those is a chiddush. The Ran explains why there's a chiddush in each one, why each one is better than the other one. We'll avoid that for now. But the Gemara's chiddush, the halacha makes sense. This is a case where he changed. In a case where he changed, Rabbah says it's a machlokes. Only according to Rabbi Akiva do we say Eid l'Shabbat Miksasa Bad Lakula, and that is Rabbi Akiva is the same as Beisil, of course. Only according to Rabbi Akiva and Beisil do we say Eid l'Shabbat Miksasa Bad Lakula, and therefore, this is an example of their opinion in which the halacha would be that the entire neder is batal and everybody's mutter, and it's different than the third case, and it's only according to them. However, according to Beis Shammai and the Chachamim, this is the case of the machlokas where they argue and they say no. The halacha would be that the neder is chal on the others. Now, the problem is going to be, what do we do according to Rava? It's not going to make sense, and that's why it's a proof against Rava. Now, according to Rava, the machlokas between Beisil and Beis Shammai and Rabbi Akiva the Chachamim is in the case where he did not change the lashon. He said in the beginning, all of you, and then he said, had I known if my father was there, I would have said all of you except for my father, but he didn't change the basic formulation. So that's the case of the machlokas. Therefore, that has to be the case of case one. And it also has to be the case of case two, because otherwise, how is this an example of Rabbi Akiva's opinion? How is it an example of Beis Shammai's, of Beis Hillel's opinion? It would be according to everyone. Everybody agrees that it is mutter, and that the neder is not chal, if it would be that he changed the language. So it's got to be that case one and case two are both talking about where he didn't change, and that's where there's a machlokes. The problem is, and this is the way the Ran explains the Gemara, because the Gemara phrases this a bit oddly. The Gemara says case two can't be that. Case two has to be where he changed, and now we have a problem that it's not a machlokes. The Ran explains that you can't say that both case one and case two are talking about where he kept the same, because then what's the chiddush of two cases? What do you need two cases for saying the same halacha if he kept it the same? Abishlama in Rabbah, you need two cases because one is showing where he started with all of you and then he changed to one at a time. And the other one is where he started with one at a time and he changed to all of you. But if he's staying the same, the two cases are exactly the same halacha. What's the difference between the two? Either he started by saying all of you and he kept all of you. He started by saying one at a time and he kept saying one at a time. Why should there be a difference? So therefore, we have a problem. How are we going to learn what is the case according to Rava? And it's a proof against Rava. The Gemara answers by saying, this way you're explaining this mission makes no sense anyway. I have to give a whole new explanation of the case 2 and 3, and it is totally irrelevant to the way you want to learn it. The problem is why does case 2 and 3 distinguish between whether the father was the first one he mentioned or the father was the last one he mentioned? According to the way you're explaining it, should make no difference. And this is a kasha both in Rabbah and in Rava. So we have to say that the second case and the third case are talking about a totally different halacha. Second case and third case are talking about where he mentioned the first one. He said, there's an Isra on you. And then he said the second one is like the first one. And then he said the third one is like the first one or the second one. And he linked them all to the first one. So now there's a difference between if the father was the first one or the father was the last one. If the father was the first one, so then all the Nedarim are canceled because they're all like the first one and the first one was canceled. Therefore, the whole thing falls apart. If the father was the last one, so all the other ones that went before him are all a valid neder. He made each one separately, and only the father, who's the last one, is canceled, but everybody else is like him. So that's the chiddush of the case. That's what those two cases are referring to. It's not talking at all about this entire sugya that you're looking for a chiddush for. Now, what was case 1? Case 1 was where he did not say one at a time. He just said all of you are aser. So that's the case of the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. According to Rabbah, that machlokes will be in the situation where he changed the language. According to Rava, that'll be in a situation where he did not change the language. Either way, that's the case of the machlokes, and therefore that's the case which demonstrates Beis Shammai's opinion that the edus that batal muksasa is not batal kula at all. The other two cases have nothing to do with our sugya b'chal. Now the Gemara points out that it has to be true what we said, that the cases where that case 2 and 3 is where each one was made similar to the one before him, and that is because the next line in the Mishnah there says that if the father was the middle one, so then all the ones that came before him are all included in the Yisr, and all the ones that came after him are not. And that's because each one was linked to the one before him. So anybody after him is linked to somebody who had a canceled neder, a nullified neder, and therefore those are all fine. The neder is not chal on them. And the ones before are linked to someone who had, to the first guy who had a valid neder, and therefore the nedarim all are okay. Now, the next raya is really a kasha both on Rava and on Rava, but the Gemara asks it on Rava. The case is the next phrase in that same Mishnah Daf Samach above, where somebody makes a neder he's not going to eat onions, and he says because it's bad for the heart. And then they tell him, but a kufri onion is good for the heart. So now that was a mistake. The neder that he made on the kufri onion was a mistake. He was only asur because he thought it was bad for the heart, but really it's good for the heart. So on that part, it's batal. Now the question is he allowed to eat all the onions? Because batal miksasa batal kula. So the Mishnah paskins, yes, he's allowed to eat all the onions, batal miksasa batal kula. And the Mishnah says that Rabbi Meir went ahead and was matir all the onions in exactly a case like that. Now, according to Rava, Rabbi Meir is the one who says Tvois Lashon Rishon, and therefore Rabbi Meir is the one who should hold that if you did not change the language, kept the language the same, the halacha should be, like Beis Shammai says, that you say Eilish Batla Miksasa is not Batla Kula, and therefore the rest of it stays. Now, this case, Pashta says, talking about we didn't change the language. Why would he assume he changed the language? Therefore, Beis Shammai would hold Eidah Shabbat L'Miksasa, according to Rava's Pshat. Beis Shammai would hold Eidah Shabbat L'Miksasa is not Batla Kula. That's the case of the Machlokes, and he would hold it's not Batla Kula. And therefore, Rabbi Meir, who Beis Shammai's opinion is based on, should also hold that way. Eidah Shabbat Miksasa, not Batla Kula, because Tvois Lashon Rishon, and we ignore everything else, and it didn't really change. So the rest of the neder stays and sticks. And therefore, why does the Mishnah say that there's a case that happened where he allowed all the other onions to be eaten? That means he said the entire neder is Batal, but it's not true. According to Rava's understanding, Beis Shammai should say it's not Batla Kula. There's a kasha on Rabbah also, and we're not going to get into it, but according to Rabbah, in a case where the language didn't change, everybody should agree that it's asur. So it doesn't fit in the Mishnah altogether to say that the rest of them are mutter. So we'll leave that for now. Okay. So the Gemara answers that no, the case is not where he kept the same language. The case is where he changed the language, and therefore, according to the way Rava learns, when he changed the language, there's no machlokes. Everybody agrees that it's mutter. The neder is canceled. It's not dependent on batal miksasa batal kula, and that's why Rabbi Meir paskins that the entire thing is batal because he took the entire neder down altogether, and has nothing to do with Tvois Lashon Rishon or any of that, and therefore it fits fine.